27 years old, and my fiancée Emily is 25. We met almost 7 years ago when we were both in college. We were introduced through mutual friends, and about a year later, we started dating. When I introduced her to my family, everyone was thrilled with her, even my mom, who's usually pretty reserved about foreigners. Note, my mom and dad are immigrants, and ever since moving to the country we live in, they've always stayed close to the local community. So, in general, they're wary of people who aren't part of our community. At this point, I should mention my brother Jake, who's 29. Before the incident, he was like a superhero to me. I always looked up to him because he was never afraid of the local kids and always stood up for me and our younger sister Sarah, who's 22. He always reminded us that we shouldn't bow our heads just because someone tried to mess with us, that we had just as much right to live here as anyone else. When I introduced him to my girlfriend, they became good friends. Over time, Emily grew pretty close to my family, especially with my brother and sister. She also bonded with my other relatives, went shopping with my sister and mom, played pool with me and my cousins, and attended every party my family threw. At one of those parties, my family and I got so drunk that I ended up passing out on the floor in my parents' living room. When the party was winding down, Emily started acting strange. When I asked her what was wrong, she said, "I think your brother tried to kiss me." The shock of her words sobered me up instantly, and I asked her to tell me everything that happened. She explained that a few guests had gone up to the roof to drink, get some fresh air or something like that. Gradually, everyone left, and eventually it was just her and my brother up there. They had a few more drinks, and while they were talking, she noticed him staring at her intently. Suddenly, he leaned in, trying to kiss her, but she was quicker and dodged him. The atmosphere became incredibly awkward, and she left. After she finished telling me what happened, I drove her home and later talked to my brother to get his side of the story. He told me the same story, but from his perspective. He apologized, saying he was so drunk he didn't know what he was doing, and he asked for forgiveness again. Just remembering that conversation makes my blood boil because at the time I thought it was just a minor incident, something that could be resolved with a conversation and setting boundaries. I never could have imagined what would happen next. After what happened at that party, the relationship between me and Jake became strained. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was overly polite, like we were strangers. The only person besides the three of us who knew what happened was my younger sister, Sarah. One day, while she was talking to Emily, she asked why Jake and I had grown apart, and Emily told her everything. Emily and I decided not to tell the rest of the family to avoid causing an even bigger rift. A few months later, my mom threw another party, inviting a lot of people, friends, relatives, and members of our community. At this party, Emily saw my brother again. By then, I thought enough time had passed since the kissing incident, and this could be a first step toward normalizing things. At one point, I lost sight of Emily and started looking for her. I searched the entire party but couldn't find her, so I thought she might be with my sister. But something made me go upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I started hearing strange noises coming from one of the rooms. When I opened the door, I saw my brother pinning Emily to the bed, covering her mouth, and trying to put his hand under her dress while she struggled. I didn't hesitate for a second and immediately lunged at my brother, beating him up. Emily ran out of the room as fast as she could and went downstairs to get help. When my dad and uncle came upstairs, I was still hitting Jake. My dad managed to pull us apart, but I kept yelling at him and tried to hit him again. Eventually, he restrained me. While my uncles checked on Jake outside the room, my dad asked me, "What the hell happened? What made you do this?" It took me a moment to find the words, but I finally said I had just seen my brother trying to rape my fiancée. My dad, as far as I could tell, was in shock. He sat on the floor for a while, holding his head, and stayed silent for about 10 minutes until my uncles called him to take Jake to the hospital. After Jake was taken away, I went to find Emily and found her with my sister. They were talking about what had happened. I said goodbye to my sister, and we left. The whole way home, Emily couldn't stop crying. She was confused, angry, and when we got home, she kept crying until she fell asleep. This became her routine for several days until she gradually started talking again. During those days, my family kept me updated on Jake's condition. I had broken his nose and dislocated his jaw. My mom was in denial, refusing to believe her son could do something like that. But I didn't think much of it, understanding that everyone reacts differently. To some extent, I even understood why my mom was trying to justify Jake's actions. The last I heard after he got out of the hospital, many people turned their backs on him for what he'd done. He lost his job and left town. For the next few weeks, I almost completely cut off contact with the outside world and focused on helping Emily. To put it mildly, she was coping as best as she could. She was still terrified of what had happened and completely drained. She spent almost a month at home, but eventually had to go back to work. However, after a few hours, she came back, saying she couldn't shake the feeling of being threatened, that she was in danger, and that someone might try to hurt her at any moment. Update number 2. Hello again, everyone. I know it's been a while since my last update, but I wanted to share a full update once the issue was resolved. What happened? While not everything is completely finished, I'm happy to report that Jake is finally facing justice for his actions. After my last update, Emily, a few friends, and I started digging into Jake's life to find out if he had abused or attempted to abuse other women. Once all the evidence was gathered, we made sure he would face consequences. In the end, we uncovered 8 different cases, including Emily's, where Jake had harassed women in some way. These included his ex-girlfriends, former coworkers, and 2 of his current colleagues. I also mentioned that once the evidence was ready, I planned to show it to his parents, to make them realize the monster they were defending, and to post everything on social media. However, I didn't do any of that because our lawyer advised against it. He warned that if I shared the information with his parents, there was a chance they might try to protect Jake and interfere with our plans. At first, I didn't think much of it. I wanted to wake his parents up to the truth, but at that point, I couldn't trust them anymore, given the possibility that they had covered for him in the past. Additionally, posting the information on social media could backfire, as Jake could accuse us of defamation, which would only complicate things. I also cut off communication with my parents during this time to ensure they couldn't sabotage anything. I simply couldn't trust them anymore. Here, I want to give a shout out to my sister, Sarah. She pretended to stay neutral throughout all of this, but in reality, she was helping Emily and me behind the scenes. She found out what Jake had been up to. The main things she discovered were that after the incident at the party, Jake moved to the other side of the country because he had a friend there. At that point, my family had shown some sense and cut ties with him. When he started living there, he told everyone that his family had disowned him because they supposedly found out about his affair with his brother's girlfriend. Yes, he actually dared to spin that story about my fiancé. As I mentioned earlier, we didn't file a police report at the time because I had sent him to the hospital that night. Because of that, we couldn't pursue legal action without risking charges against me. That's why Jake was able to get a job and start rebuilding his life. He first reached out to my parents at the end of the second year during the toughest period of the pandemic in our country. Since then, he and my mom had been in regular contact. My parents even visited him a few times, and now the worst part. Over the years, Jake had a daughter. She was born from a casual relationship. The woman got pregnant in April 2021, and they agreed to raise the child together since neither wanted to get married. In December of that year, my niece was born. Jake introduced his girlfriend and daughter to our parents and Sarah just 2 weeks before all the evidence was gathered. When Sarah told me about this, it felt like a punch to the gut. At first, I couldn't believe what she was saying, but she showed me their photos. In that moment, my world shook again because now not only would my family have to face the truth, but so would his. However, I soon realized that this child was another reason to keep fighting for justice. We couldn't risk leaving the girl or her mother in contact with Jake. Emily and I leaned on each other through all of this. If this situation was hard for me, I can't even imagine how difficult it was for her. I'll never fully understand how she managed to cope with such a traumatic experience and find the strength to relive it to help others. The least I could do was stand by her every step of the way. Finally, the day came. Jake was at my parents' house when the police arrived. According to Sarah, it was a chaotic scene. As soon as the police knocked on the door, Jake tried to run. The police caught him, and he resisted arrest, which led to him being tased and charged with assaulting an officer. After 2 days in holding, Jake was sent to jail to await trial. The court process was grueling, both inside and outside the courtroom. During the hearings, two of the women who had been victimized by Jake broke down in tears while testifying. Emily stayed calm during her testimony, but when we were alone afterwards, she broke down, and I cried with her, doing my best to comfort her. The moment my parents and Sarah took the stand was a turning point for me. This man was finally facing justice, but he had already caused so much harm. I don't think many of the women will ever fully forget what happened. They'll just learn to live with the trauma. It was the hardest week of my life, but finally, after what felt like forever, Jake was found guilty on all 8 charges. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Of course, he tried to drag me into it, claiming excessive force and self-defense, according to his lawyer, but the judge dismissed that argument. As for my parents and those who supported Jake, it's going to be hard never seeing them again, especially my parents, but I can't trust them anymore. Even though I'm losing part of my family, my future feels bright with the woman I love by my side. Right now, I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I can only express my gratitude and admiration for all the women who came forward, as well as everyone who shared similar stories in the comments on my posts. To all the women and men who have ever been victims of something so horrific, I wish you peace. And to those who are afraid to speak up, I want to say, you're not alone. This situation has shown me that there are more good people than bad, and there will always be someone willing to lend a helping hand. So, feel free to share your thoughts on this whole story in the comments. I think that despite the number of crimes my brother committed, many people would struggle with the dilemma of whether to turn him in or not. After all, he's still family, and confronting your parents is an incredibly difficult decision. For me, I believe justice should come before family ties, especially when it comes to such serious crimes. But what do you think? How would you handle this situation? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories. Also, don't forget to check out our previous video, which you can find right here. Thanks for watching, and take care.